There's an epidemic that's covering our world, and it's violence. Everywhere you look, there's violence. Turn on the TV, look at Facebook, turn on Twitter, even YouTube. There's violence everywhere. Why? Why are we so engulfed in violence? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today, so stay tuned. Welcome back to Coloring Through the Bible. My name is Keegan Harkins, and today we are talking about an unpleasant topic. We're talking about violence. We're talking about this negative impact that it's had on our world. Everything in this world is tainted with violence. Everything that we watch, everything that we read, video games, they're all violent. And there's not a country in this world that isn't marred with the scars of violence. And it seems like it doesn't take much to make people resort to violence. We went to Pizza Hut last night with some friends, and this car parked next to us and opened their door and just slammed into our car. And my husband got out and he's like, hey, let's make sure that the car's not damaged before you just walk away. And the guy threatened my husband, told him he needed to get back in his car before he effed him up in front of his family because he scratched our car. He scratched our car, but he was threatening to physically attack my husband because my husband wanted to see how bad the scratch was. Violence is everywhere, and it seems like people just snap at the littlest things. Cut somebody off in traffic, and the next thing you know, you're hearing on the news about road rage. I've seen YouTube videos where people pull over on the side of the road and pop out a gun because somebody cut them off. It's crazy how little it takes for people to resort to violence. But is violence the problem? And we hear a lot about gun control and, all of these crazy ways that people are trying to regulate our society to get rid of violence. But you know what? None of those things are ever going to work. Because violence isn't the problem. It's the symptom. And fixing the violence issues, trying to put regulations to end violence, all it's doing is putting a Band-Aid on an open, gushing wound. It's like nicking an artery and thinking that you can just kiss the boo-boo better. It's not going to work because violence isn't the problem. It's merely evidence of the problem. And the problem is that our world has turned their back on God. And I know that that's been said before, but it's truly the truth. Because the Bible tells us over and over again that God is love, especially John. John loved it to tell us how much God is love. And in 1 John he says, if you know God, then you're going to walk in love. And if you're not walking in love, then you don't really know God. Because God is love. So if we're not walking in love, then we're walking in violence, hate, fear, all of these negative things that are rampant in our world. And it's rampant in our world because people have turned their back on God. And this isn't anything new. This has been going on since Genesis. Go back to the very beginning. Cain picked up a rock and killed his brother. There was the first incidence of violence on this earth. And it had to do with their relationship with God. Abel loved the Lord. He put God first. He gave him the best of everything he had. Cain couldn't really care less. He really just didn't care. He knew that there was a God. He just really didn't think that he needed to live his life thinking about God. And that was the beginning of this road towards a separation between lives and God. And I'm not saying that Cain's descendants lived like bandits. It'd be easier if evil was visibly evil. That would be so much easier. If Satan walked around as the little red guy with the horns and the funky tail, then we'd all know, hey, stay away from that guy. But that's not the way it worked. When we read about who Cain's descendants were, they were some pretty important people. The very first civilization, as we would call it, came from Cain and his descendants. Cain built the first city. That's the first step. And then his descendants were, in Genesis chapter 4, in verse 21, we have a guy named Jubal, and he was the father of all who play the flute and the harp. So he introduced music to society. And then his brother, he is the one who forged all kinds of tools out of bronze and iron. So we have technological advances. So we have society, we have enrichment of society, and we have protection and advancement of society. All of those are really great things. But they also turned their back on the Lord. And the result was that violence just spread. And right away, right in Genesis chapter 4, verse 23, we have a descendant of Cain named Lamech who killed a guy for injuring him, for wounding him. And we don't know if that was like he broke his arm or if he made fun of him. But he either wounded his pride or he wounded his body. It wasn't a terminal wound, it was just an insult. It was a small wound, and so he killed him. And that's what we see in our world today. We have people offended by other people, so they resort to violence. We have people who don't agree with what people say, so they resort to violence. People are ending up in the hospital or dead simply because they disagree with somebody else. And that kind of violence stems from the fact that these people had turned their back on God. Because if we are close to God, and God is love, then we're going to be love. We're going to be forgiving. We're going to show mercy. We're going to show grace. Because here's the big thing. Here's the big difference. You can totally say that there is no God. You can completely abandon the Lord 100% and still love and still be a good person. But to love people who hate you, to love people who hurt you, to forgive when that person doesn't even care if they're forgiven, that takes God's influence. Because that's a kind of love that doesn't come naturally. But that's the kind of love that Jesus told us we need to have. That's the kind of love that God gives us, that he shows us by example. And that's the only kind of love that keeps violence from living in our lives. Because our own personalities, our own nature says that if somebody hurts you, you hurt them back. It says that if hurting them before they hurt you is preventing violence to you, it's saving yourself. It's the way that our own natural desires work, but it's completely opposite from what God says. And the closer we draw to God, the more we are changed into God's image. And the less we'll rely on violence and manipulation to get what we want. And the more we will see each other as children of God. And we won't care about getting what we want anymore. Our focus goes off of us and onto God. And then we'll be looking for ways to give God glory. And we'll be looking at people around us as his children with the love that he gives them. So as we see more and more violence just kind of flowing through our world today, and no amount of culture and society and rules and regulation is making any kind of an impact on the way that violence just keeps multiplying all over this earth, let it be a reminder to us to give our hearts to the Lord. Let it be a reminder to us to pray for those people who are walking in disobedience from God. I mean, as Christians, we have a big responsibility to not just love the unlovable, but to pray for them. Pray for the people who need the Lord. Nobody's beyond his love. So pray for them. Because that is the real problem in our world today and since the beginning of time. Violence shows hearts that have turned away from the Lord. So as we see violence, let us turn our hearts to the Lord and pray that our world does too. Thanks for spending some time with me today. I hope you've been encouraged. Until I see you again, have a truly blessed day.